Welcome to The Critique. We are reviewing a submission of recent executive orders and press materials covering everything from the economy and space to immigration. Let's get straight into the analysis. The administration's economic fact sheets achieve the rhetorical impact by isolating specific data points and attributing huge macroeconomic shifts to single policy changes, which, it weakens the overall analysis.
It really does.
So a key theme here is this story of a rapid economic turnaround. You see it in headlines like Democrats cost high prices, President Trump is bringing them down.
And they use those very selective charts, right, to show price drops for things like eggs.
Right, down 15.8% after that massive spike. And they tout the nearly $3,000 annual reduction in average new mortgage costs.
It's a very effective piece of communication politically. But I wonder if we've looked at how presenting just a few, sharp percentage drops can really mask the bigger economic picture for an expert reader.
So the weakness is the omission.
The weakness is the strategic omission, both of external factors and the initial baseline. When you talk about mortgage costs or gas prices dipping below $3, the narrative gives all the credit to deregulation and energy policy.
But wait, for their intended audience, isn't that selective approach actually a strength? I mean, they're framing these complex shifts in a way that's easy to digest and pin on a single policy victory.
Rhetorically, absolutely, it's a strength, but it really hurts the credibility of this omission as a piece of, serious policy analysis.
It needs to be stronger for this audience.
Exactly. The weakness is that it ignores the predictable way prices correct themselves or how global energy prices were stabilizing anyway. And there's also a bit of a sleight of hand.
How so?
The material talks about no tax on tips and no tax on overtime as if they're established facts.
But those are proposals.
They're proposals, future goals, and they're being used to pump up the current economic narrative. That's deceptive wording, and it hurts the integrity of the whole thing.
Okay, so how do we suggest they fix it?
To strengthen it, to give it credibility, you have to integrate statements that acknowledge the other forces at play. You have to ground the claims in action that's already been codified, not just future promises.
So can you give us a concrete example? How do you keep the political win but still acknowledge reality?
Okay, so when you cite the drop in inflation to 2.7%, don't just frame it as a Trump fix.
You have to add the context.
Add the context. Frame it as a predictable effect after massive global stimulus, and then argue why the administration's specific actions made that trend happen faster here than elsewhere. That adds depth.
And what about that warrior dividend?
The 1776 warrior dividend plays great with the law-abiding Americans theme. But then you look at the federal pay-EO. Who really benefits there?
Right.
It directs OPM to assess whether to provide up to a 3.8% increase for some law enforcement. Talking about that potential increase like it's a done deal is it's misleading political theater.
So the suggestion is to clarify that it's an assessment, not a guarantee.
Yes. And clarify that the EO is mostly just executing standardized pay schedules, which is a routine administrative function they're dressing up as this major new benefit.
That's a huge distinction. It really shows how messaging can create a feeling of benefit without actually delivering guaranteed substance. That brings us to the fentanyl decision. Okay, next up. The executive order designating illicit fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction uses this powerful, escalating language that shifts legal and military frameworks. But the practical benefits seem unclear beyond just political positioning.
That's the heart of it.
I mean, the material argues fentanyl is like a chemical weapon. Deadly in tiny doses, profits fund terror. So it directs the Attorney General to go after enhanced charges and tells the Secretary of War to see if enhanced national security resources are needed.
The question for the analysis has to be, is the link between calling fentanyl a WMD and actually improving counter-narcotics efforts really established, or is this policy mostly symbolic?
The weakness, then, is the rhetorical overreach.
Yes, it risks some serious policy drift. This designation opens the door to using military assets and, broad national security intelligence against what is, at its core, a criminal trafficking problem.
But couldn't you argue that escalation is needed? I mean, terror financing laws, Schedule 1 classifications, they're all in place, but the crisis hasn't stopped.
They haven't, that's true. But the policy analysis needs to show the added value. The material itself notes the Halt Fentanyl Act already made these substances Schedule 1. 8 cartels are already designated as foreign terrorist organizations.
So the WMD label seems redundant?
Tariffs against countries like Mexico and China. If the goal is actual policy effectiveness, we have to know what specific new legal powers are unlocked that weren't there before.
So the suggestion is to really sharpen that point.
To strengthen this, you have to articulate the unique legal levers this WMD designation provides. That's what moves it beyond political theater into something that could be demonstrably effective at protecting people.
So get into the legal weeds.
Exactly. Specify, for instance, does this allow for brand new financial sanctions that weren't available under tariff financing laws? Does it allow for surveillance of precursor chemicals in a new way? And more importantly, we have to talk about the constitutional tension here.
With the military involvement?
Yes. The material says the Secretary of War can provide enhanced national security resources to the DOJ. We need to analyze the threshold where that crosses into domestic military intervention. It could compromise posse comitatus.
Which restricts using the military for domestic law enforcement.
And that is a huge constitutional risk that this submission just collides right over.
That's a crucial frame. The material presents it as an aggressive solution, but the critique needs to highlight that the aggression carries these profound constitutional risks, especially if it's just posturing. Let's pivot now to space policy. The executive order on ensuring American space superiority seems to really realign national strategy to heavily favor private commercial interests, and that could potentially limit public access to some critical services that used to be free.
It's a big shift.
Looking closely at the EO, it sets these bold goals, right? Back to the moon by 2028, a lunar outpost by 2030. But Section 2C is really aggressive about growing the commercial space economy, attracting $50 billion in new investment and pushing agencies to prioritize commercial solutions.
And building on that, the biggest change for the average person, or even for smaller companies, is the revision to Space Policy Directive 3.
That's the one governing space traffic management.
Right, and the material notes that this critical information is going to change from being provided free of direct user fees to being available for commercial and other relevant use.
That sounds like a massive commercialization of a public safety service.
It is. It's a cost transfer. This is essential for keeping orbit safe.
So this really feels like a case of prioritizing short-term budget savings for the government and immediate benefits for the big established space firms.
Exactly, at the potential expense of the whole ecosystem. The risk here is that by focusing only on helping large market players, you overlook the public interest in having free access to this data.
Data everyone needs to avoid collisions.
Everyone. And creating a fee for it puts a huge burden on startups, on researchers, on academic institutions that just don't have big defense budgets. I mean, the EO even makes NASA pay for its own publication. That shows you the kind of financial pressure this is putting on the public agency itself.
So what's the recommendation here?
To make the material more robust, you have to clarify the administration's plan for mitigating that cost burden on smaller players. You need to justify why privatizing a public safety service is the best way forward, rather than something that just benefits a few big companies.
And we should probably analyze that subtle change in the wording.
Absolutely. What does moving from free of direct user fees to just available for commercial and other relevant use really mean in practice?
It means critical safety data is now for sale.
That's the bottom line. The critique has to lay out that trade-off clearly. Immediate savings for the government versus, potential long-term costs or restricted access for everyone else. Think about the chilling effect on global research if data for collision avoidance suddenly has a price tag.
This policy really seems to benefit the wealthy, established players who can afford it.
Or who can develop their own systems, boxing out innovation.
That's a perfect transition to our discussion on immigration, where policy also seems to be hurting ordinary people under the banner of security. The proclamation restricting entry for foreign nationals, it broadens restrictions based on bureaucratic metrics, like visa overstay rates. And it specifically targets family ties, which directly harms regular Americans trying to reunite with family.
All while using that political messaging about law-abiding Americans.
I can see the administration's goal. The December 16th proclamation expands restrictions on 7 new areas and adds partial ones on 15 more. And it cites things like visa overstay rates, like the Gambia at almost 39% for student visas.
That analysis of the metrics is fine, but we have to dig into the motive and the real-world impact. Couldn't you also conclude that these policies just disproportionately punish regular people trying to enter legally, all based on their home country's flawed bureaucracy?
The weakness is the overreach.
The fundamental weakness is how it narrows the family-based visa carve-outs. The document explicitly says that family ties can serve as unique vectors for fraudulent, criminal, or even terrorist activity.
That language is extreme. Calling family ties vectors for fraud is a political choice with a real human cost.
It is. And this move, buried deep in the document, it fundamentally hurts regular Americans. It makes family reunification so much harder, based on the blanket generalization of risk from a country, not on individual security threats.
So it's moving beyond standard vetting?
It's becoming punitive policy against lawful immigration pathways.
So how should the submission handle this?
It has to analyze how severely this limitation impacts the idea of dignity for all and the American families trying to legally reunite. You need to contrast the emphasis on these minor compliance metrics, like the 4.3% tourist visa overstay rate for Senegal, with the severe human cost of shutting down the most common legal path for immigrants from those places.
And we need concrete examples of that imbalance?
For sure. The document justifies these bans across Africa and the Caribbean based on overstay rates, a compliance issue, while claiming it's about security. You need to clarify that while some countries on the list have serious security issues, like Syria, adding 15 new countries, based mostly on non-immigrant overstay rates, is a strategic choice.
A choice to reduce legal immigration?
A choice to get a statistical reduction in legal immigration, masquerading as a security measure.
We've covered a lot of ground today, analyzing this pattern from the administration. We've seen claims of massive economic gains that isolate metrics, the intense rhetorical framing of the fentanyl WMD designation, and the huge policy shifts in space that benefit commercial interests.
And the really profound punitive impact of expanding travel restrictions on legal, family-based immigration pathways.
Right.
Our core advice is pretty consistent across all these areas. You need to transition this material from a series of, highly persuasive but selective press releases into a robust, logical, and fully supported policy analysis.
Which means integrating counterarguments.
Exactly. Integrate contextual counter-arguments on the economy, provide real clarity on the real-world impact beyond the political language, and acknowledge the negative consequences for regular Americans.
Especially on the cost of public space data and the severe restriction of family immigration.
Yes, that's the key.
Thank you for submitting your work. We look forward to seeing your revised analysis incorporating these insights. Feel free to submit your materials back to us anytime.